Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Cure Board of Directors and members, I'd like to thank you for joining us today for this exciting Fireside Chat. Today, we have the honor of welcoming Paul Massey, former New York City mayoral candidate, former founder of Massey Nackle, which used to be Manhattan's #1 investment sales brokerage firm, and current founder and CEO of B6 Real Estate Advisors. As we go through the discussion today, please feel free to submit questions for the Q&A and we will get to them throughout the session. Welcome, Paul, and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Darren. Thanks to everyone for having me. Appreciate it.
Of course. So I know we talked about it before, Paul, but today we're going to discuss the past and present and the future of commercial real estate and investment sales. And Paul, I think a great starting point is to start with your story for those of us who don't know it, and tell us how you got started in real estate and how you got to where you are today.
Absolutely. Well, I started out by getting a summer job with CBRE in my hometown of Boston. I was involved with my fraternity, and there was an alum who was supposed to come around a couple of times a year and make sure we weren't burning the house down. And he was a CBRE national accounts officer, so we became great friends. He got me a job in Boston for the summer, and I loved what I saw. And then when I got out of school, I went running back there, determined to work for CB, but the local Boston manager wasn't having it. He had one opening. It was a mature office, and he said, "I've got a Xerox copier salesman and an IBM computer salesman, and for the one opening, I'm not going to roll the dice on college kid." And so I went back to my fraternity connection, and he said, "Well, that's the bad news. The good news is we're brand new in New York City, and they'll take anybody down there." So a lot of my classmates, I went to Colgate in upstate, a lot of my classmates were coming here, and my grand plan was come here for 6 months, 9 months, work hard, impress them, and convince them to give me the job back in Boston that I thought I wanted. And that didn't last too long. Boston was a great place. It's a great city, but I fell pretty quickly in love with New York City. And so we did 5 years at CB. Once I got there, I met Bob Nackle, who I started our first business with there. He showed up after about a year, and together we informally partnered and teamed up to do investment sales in New York City. And we left when we were too young to know any better. I think I was 20. I think Bob was 26. I was 27, and we started our own company, and we had that company for 26 years. And it wasn't anything, where we were so great, but you would have thought New York City was institutional and organized. But it was really the Wild West in that niche. So we found ourselves in a place where we were repping about a third of everyone who was selling their building in New York, and we had that run for a long time. Sold that business to Cushman & Wakefield at the end of 2014. Did have a run at politics that was a fantastic time, and then when that didn't work out, started B6, which is another investment sales firm. But also has a focus on debt brokerage, because we think aligning those two practices is the way forward.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Thank you for that rundown. And I guess a easy segue to learning about you from the beginning all the way to the end is like, how have you seen brokerage change from the very beginning? From CBRE, whether it's technology, whether it's using data, to how much you use data now at B6 to drive investment sales and obviously the debt brokerage side.
Kind of the big two buckets of change are the property data, what was available back in the day was scarce, but that turned into a competitive advantage because we created a database that was proprietary, and our troops were out in the field. We had 75 agents at the height of Massey and they were in every submarket in New York. But they would feed comps, sale data, land sale data, development data back to the mothership, and we distilled it and put out big reports on what was happening in our world. And that proved to be great because we were giving the information away for free, but it made us one of the trusted authorities about a market that we already had pretty lucky market share in. So it became a double moat around the business where it would be very daunting to compete with us. So that was the first bucket, just raw data. And we knew that there'd be companies like Reonomy and Rheology and everybody else who would sell, RCA, I should say, who would sell this data back to the service providers. But we had a big, long, probably 10-year run on them before they emerged. The other focus that we had was around a proprietary CRM system so that our teams can share notes on what our clients are doing, even if they're operating in different markets. And there's power in that. So that has evolved in a very significant way, and we're taking advantage of that.
Very cool. Very cool. Do you find that now that the data is more relevant and more readily available to other brokerage shops, do you find yourselves doing other things that give you a little bit of a leg up, or how you kind of try to stay ahead of the competition?
Well, you have to think about what areas of the business aren't readily available still, right? And one of the big areas is data around debt. And so we're looking at that like it's, back in 1988 again. There really isn't a lot of transparency around what goes on in the debt market in the 5 boroughs. So we're focusing on that as something that we can bring this same level of focus on, and start producing reports that track LTVs and interest rates in different submarkets and loan types, property types. So that's probably to us the next frontier for what could be organized. And again, there'll be big companies that come in and start producing this data en masse, but right now it does not exist.
Great. I think it's obviously a competitive advantage always to get ahead of what everybody else is trying to do, especially on a market related level. And with that being said, I guess one of the things we talked about the other day was how technology is going to make, and has made, real estate a little bit more efficient over the last few years. And I just think about one of the funny stats that I heard, prior to the pandemic, where I think real estate was one of the slow adopters to technology and implementing technology. I think second slowest industry behind agriculture and farming, maybe, or something of that nature. But to that point, I've seen tremendous amount of growth in just a matter of 3 years since the pandemic, whether it's technology within the building or outside of it. Do you see I know previously we discussed technology taking place and making things more efficient from a transaction standpoint. Can you speak to that a little bit on how you see technology just making things more efficient for both buyers, sellers, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, the just a simple PSA, the purchase and sale contract is an arcane process, and so is the due diligence leading up to the execution of that document. So if you can put together effectively a war room that provides all the due diligence someone would want, including environmental reports, including an initial run of the title of the property, so you're getting ahead of that, and boil down these, again, arcane PSA contracts so that maybe there's one that we can all agree and use uniformly. you would accelerate the speed of our business by a lot. So we're focusing on that too, because that again would be that's another thing that's going to happen, right? You know that the world's going to keep evolving, and we've always had the philosophy, which was embrace change. Just if you can see or imagine something changing due to technology, embrace it. Set your business up so that you benefit from when it happens.
Very cool. Very cool. And I agree. As to your point, is that everything is evolving. You got to get ahead of it as best as you can, and continue to keep that open mind and how things might change to accelerate growth. And speaking of growth, I guess the next part of it, as we tie into B6 a little bit, how, from a leadership perspective, because it seems like from the top down, you have an open mind into this progression. How have you seen your leadership style give an advantage to some of your brokers in how they go about doing their day-to-day job? Because clearly, you've had success with, previous firms with Massey and then obviously B6, I see you guys all over the place. And again, like I said, a lot of that's from the top down. How do you take your leadership style and implement it so that you can empower your brokers to be strong, real estate entrepreneurs?
Yeah, so that it probably makes sense to a lot of the folks in your organization, whether they're directly in sales or whatever they're doing. You really want a management team that's infused with what I call servant leadership, like who works for who. Our attitude is that all of our salesmen, they're basically running a business within a business. They have the sub-markets they focus in, and we really make an effort to let them understand that we are working for them. So we have a great dedicated management team, a CFO, a COO who runs all our data, and a top level sales manager, our chief revenue officer, and they are 100% behind improving the revenue of each of the salesmen and the lives of the salesmen as they go through their day-to-day. So if you're in an organization, you'll get a sense for whether or not what approach the management team has, and that's just really the way we think about it, and it's very important to us.
No, I think in any organization, people want to feel empowered and want to feel like they have the support from leadership, and at least in my experience, it's always a great environment when you have ownership over your work and over your business, and I think that's just such a fantastic approach. I think if you want to kind of flip the script on that, from an entrepreneurial experience, because it seems as though you promote entrepreneurship within each individual broker's business. People who are in real estate or just business in general, that might be listening right now, what advice would you give them in starting their business from, call it the ground up, whether, like I said, whether it's brokerage, whether it's investments, whether it's something outside of real estate? I guess what is the top three things that you would say you would give advice to starting something?
And I think this does apply to everyone out there. Number one thing is what is your passion? What is the passion of your organization? What is your personal passion? And are you out there thinking about ways where you can change the world? I think that companies who have a passion, who think that they're doing things that are going to be cutting edge, they're going to be leading their industry, tend to do very, very well. It's not just a job. It's not just about money. It can never be absolutely about money, because a passionless job is not the thing you want. So whatever you're doing now, if you love it and you're passionate about it and you know where you're going, that's great. If you don't, you should really stop and think, because the results will be much better, much bigger, and money follows. Money follows passion too. right? So if you're the passionate, I went to this small old Latin school in Boston, and the big takeaway for me was that most of the teachers there worked there for 30 years, 35 years. They almost never left. And the school had a good size endowment, so they were paid in the 90th percentile, roughly, of all teachers in Massachusetts. But that kind of didn't matter to them. It was more that they loved what they were doing. They, even in the 90th percentile, living as a teacher in Boston or any major metro area, New York, San Fran, wherever, you're on a big budget. But they felt respected. They felt like if we're in the 90th percentile, the board and the management team respects us, but they more love their job. And I always look back to that to realize it's definitely not about money in their case. And you really want to live in a world where everyone's passionate like they are.
Very cool. No, I think that makes sense, and I can't agree with you more. I think in our preliminary conversation, we talk about things that we want from an employer, and a lot of times those things are not, to your point, just money. Of course, everybody wants to make a great living, but I think there are other factors that people will bring into their lives, whether it's autonomy or lifestyle or whatever it might be, or a good cause for that matter, that are going to be ways that they choose a firm to work for or work with. Now let's go back, and as you talked about your school and the small Latin university you went to in Boston, I guess let's transition to advice you might give to student populations that are trying to get into real estate and are just starting out. They might be freshmen, sophomores, or juniors in college. And I know we talked on your experience, but what are the things that you would give advice to someone who's trying to get into real estate now, because it's very competitive, and I'm not sure if it's more or less competitive than when you or maybe I started, but seems like it's a little bit more competitive. But what advice would you give to someone just starting out?
Well, my son came to me when he was a junior in college and said, "Hey, Dad, is it weird that I don't 100% know what I want to do?" And I said, "No, that makes you normal. The average kid changes jobs 4 times in the first 10 years. And that's the average kid. So that tells you that it takes kids a while to really figure it out. And the same thing can be said for any industry, but definitely real estate, where there are a million jobs under the header of real estate. And you've got to get out there and poke around and figure out which one of them you're going to like. So I said to my son, I said, go see 100 people. And he says, "Well, Dad, I don't know 100 people." And I said, "Do you know Mr. Smith and Mr. McVicker and Mr. Jones and Mr. Gary and, on and on?" And he says, "Yeah, well, those are all our best friends." And I said, "Well, I just named 5 people and they must know 10 people. So you're halfway home." And I said, so get out there. And when you go out there, ask 3 questions. How'd you get here? What do you like about it? And what don't you like about it? And then just shut up. Just listen, soak it up. And I said, not for nothing, by the time you get to 65 or 70 people, you'll have a couple of job offers, which is not the purpose. But if you're just out seeking information as a young person, who doesn't want to help a young person? Everyone will meet with you. Everyone will try and help you, but they'll also tell you things about their career, some of which you'd expect and some of which might surprise you depending on their job title or what it is they really do. So you're just going to learn a boatload. And I often think it would be super fun to just dial the clock back and get out there and go interview with all my competitors and hear what they say about themselves and about us and about the world in general. But I would just use this to the younger folks out there. I'd use this, admit you're in an inflection point and a massive learning opportunity is in front of you, and just embrace it. Everyone's going to help.
I agree with you. I think in these times where you have, to your point, an inflection point, similar to when I came into the industry in the great financial crisis. It was a fantastic time to learn and to network, which it seems like the same thing that you're saying is build your network and learn through building your network at the same time. I think in times where there's maybe some perceived or instability in the marketplace, you find that that's a lot of the time where you'll find a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, we have this young partner at B6, our new firm, DJ Johnston, and he showed up at our office. This is back 08, 09, back in Massey times. And I knew him from, he grew up in the town where we brought the kids up. So I had known him from when he was young, but he walked into the office in the depth of the dark times in 09 and said, I really want to get involved with real estate. I want to work at your company. And he said, but I have to tell you, I've been out in the street for a year. He got done with school a year earlier. Mm-hmm. And these were dark times. These were not, people were not hiring. And he said, but, I've been out there for a year. I've had hundreds of meetings. The benefit of that is now I'm really good at a meeting. I'm confident with myself. And he was massively impressive. So we hired him right away. But he just chose to look at the glass half full and embrace the benefits of how many meetings he had and how many people he had met and how he had dealt with that. So it can be, when you're faced with a challenge like that, it's how you embrace it.
100%. And then I think embracing, it seems to be somewhat of a theme that we've talked about today. And I guess, what changes in real estate do you think should be embraced? And I'm talking technology, I'm talking diversity, I'm talking just the change in how you go about your business. But what do you see as things that should be embraced and things that should, I don't know, I won't call them a fad, but maybe are short-lived and may not stick as long as may not stick as long as some of the other changes that are happening within real estate?
What's interesting to me is with real estate and diversity is that, I think like a lot of companies, our population is really diverse, and it really reflects the makeup of New York City, which is a fantastic, diverse place. But we've got a massive problem with gender diversity in the commercial real estate business that's been this way for a long time. And we think about it and talk about it frequently because we want to change the world in our small way ourselves. But there's still a stigma with women who think that commercial real estate business is the old boys network, et cetera, et cetera. And we're constantly working and thinking about how do we attract more women into the business and just break through that. It's really nonsense of people's perception that it's not a place for everybody. So I think that's something we all kind of need to work on, and it'll make our industry a better place.
Sounds good. And I guess I know when we previously talked, you had mentioned that a large portion of the new B6 group are a diverse group from different locations, different countries, and things like that. How is it seems as though B6 has put forth an effort to make sure that their group has different perspectives and different life experiences.
Yeah, so we're a company of immigrants, and we love it. I've spent years volunteering down at the Tenement Museum on Orchard Street. I don't know if anyone's ever been there, but that's a fantastic place that tells the story of immigrants. But I don't know whether it was good luck or just that we subconsciously focused on this. But I think 1/3 of our new company are literally immigrants working on a visa or a green card or some other form of they came to New York seeking their career and their life. And we love people who come in and really appreciate everything we have. And I'm not saying young American students are any less enthusiastic and appreciative, but there's a trend with folks that aren't from here, that they're constantly thinking about how much they appreciate what we have here. And they work hard, and it makes our company more dynamic and more interesting to have those different viewpoints. So I think we got a little bit lucky, but we now, the way we're set up, if you walk in here, you realize that we embrace the immigrant story pretty strongly.
Great. That's great to hear. And that's great to hear. And again, I think within any organization, whether real estate or not, a diverse perspective is always good to have, to understand your clients. And that's, at the end of the day, that's all of who we all serve on this call, whether it's yourself, myself, or anybody listening in. Touching back on the topic of real estate, and just getting back to more of a conversation around just real estate trends and things of that nature. If you had a bucket load of money and you were saying, okay, well, this is where I see real estate going based on the data and based on what we're seeing in the marketplace. And it could be New York City specific, or it could be just in general, kind of across the board. What if you had this boatload of money and you're like, okay, I want to invest in these 1, 2, 3 asset classes, where would you place capital?
I would just buy a vacant office building right away. I mean, I cannot imagine how it goes any lower than it is right now. And I'm shocked to hear myself say this. I never would have expected the COVID hangover to be this long. The other area is probably retail. That I thought retail was, absolutely rock bottom pre-COVID. I thought technology had killed the tenants it was going to kill. That the personal services businesses that they're currently doing well were going to survive. And boy, was I wrong about that. COVID knocked the retail down because, especially in Midtown and downtown, the retail is so dependent on office workers coming in. And,
Right.
But I think I've been wrong, and I've been saying it for a long time. I think work from home is a fad. I think it's going to evaporate very quickly when it does. And when I say that, I'm very respectful of people who have, a lot of people have worked from home for years. Whether it's someone who's a single mom, or whatever it is. And we have some of them at our company too, but I think in general, to maintain a service business, you want to be together and to benefit from all the osmosis that goes around, from less experienced people to older, more successful mentor types. All that chemistry and all that communication that goes on when you're together are big. And I think if you watch the great CEOs of New York, the Jamie Dimons, the Ken Griffith from Citadel, they've been kind of pleading and begging and pulling and trying to, drag their people back for 2 or 3 years now. And I don't think they're going to stop. And I think that's right.
No, I agree. I think, when you talk about collaboration within the firm, I think there's just so much knowledge you get from being around, the internal group. And to your point of one of the things you talked about before is your team works as a team, and that goes back to, the Massey NACL days is how do you work as a team? If there are things that might be missed, if you were able to cover those, if you were in the same office, being able to have a conversation about that and answer that real time. I think there's a tremendous amount of value to that, and I think a lot of people across the board agree with that, especially for for younger folks that we talked about, just getting into the industry, there's a lot of nuances to businesses such as real estate that you can't capture if you're in it virtually. So I agree with you 100% on that. A lot of people may not want me to hear that who are working from home, but that's
I've got a middle daughter who's remote and thinks I've lost my way and that I'm not with it about this, but we'll see how that all works out.
Great. Yeah, for sure. So as we're kind of close to a halfway point, I just want to remind everyone that the Q&A is open. Feel free to submit questions and Paul and I can get them out there and get those answered. With that being said, we'll kind of continue and move on along with the conversation. As we kind of move forward and talk about the day-to-day management, when we talk about working from home, and I think that kind of fills into the day-to-day management. Are you more, your managerial style, are you more of a operator manager, or you find yourself being more of a, I'll call it a sales manager or sales spokesman? If I'm not sure if I'm posing that clearly, but I know we previously discussed it. So just want to get a deeper dive into your management style and versus an alternative management style, because I think they vary from organization to organization.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Massey Knackle was started by Bob Knackle and I, and when we started the business, we both grew up modestly, so we're from the same place. We wanted the same things. We were both, kind of student athletes. So we were very much alike, but interestingly, as the years went on, we gravitated towards different roles within the company. Bob was our chief salesman, massive producer, loved just being out with the clients, and didn't particularly love the day-to-day aspect of running the firm. I was also in sales and did pretty well, but I loved the building and the managing the day-to-day. So which was great, because that kind of became the yin and yang about him and I. And so we were close in touch every week about what was happening at the company. I'd tell him the good and the bad. And he was mostly in those meetings was impatient and just wanted to get back out into the field and be selling. But it made both of us realize, I think, that if you're in any kind of services business or sales organization, there are people who love to manage and there are people who love to sell, and they're very infrequently the same person, right? You're way better off. There's the expression about work your strengths, don't work your weaknesses, don't even bother with your weaknesses, just get somebody else to do that part of the job. And if you embrace that, and you realize that you don't want to be the manager, there's a little bit of a thing with that, though, where people think, well, I can be the manager and the salesman, and there's some kind of impressive aspect to the fact that you're the CEO of a business. Well, I don't think so. I think if you really, it's like, if you think of, Joe, I'm not a sports guy, but Joe Torre, right? The longtime coach of the Yankees, he had Jeter, he had A-Rod. Everybody needs a coach. And you would think that those players were so great, maybe they didn't need a coach. They needed a coach. And he didn't make as much money as they did. The salesman typically can make a lot more than the management people do. But you just got to get over that and do what you love. So I think this probably applies to every single person out there, whether you're running a business, whether you're running your team, whether you're running your life. Figure out which one of those two buckets you're really more appropriately in, and then embrace that. So if you're a revenue generating, externally facing person, forget about managing. You'll find a good manager for your business, and the same way, flip it around. I think when people can be clear-headed about that, the result is much better.
No, that's fantastic, and I think that ties into what we discussed before about find out what you're passionate with and what you feel you're best at.
Exactly.
And everything else will follow thereafter. And that leads me to our first Q&A. I know a lot of what we talked about are the students and people early in the game that are trying to get into real estate. But I did have a question from an attendee who asked, what advice would you give to someone who's middle-aged or over 50, who's trying to transition into commercial real estate, maybe a little bit, like I said, mid-career or later in life, who wants to get into the industry?
Well, into the industry, as we've already talked about, is a pretty broad concept.
Correct.
Because there are so many businesses within real estate. There's appraisal, there's commercial leasing, there's investment sales, there's debt brokerage, and that's just on the transaction side. There's asset management, there's so many things, development, you name it. And what I frequently meet with people who are going through, a transition, and those people are of different ages, but a really good exercise for someone who's more senior is, hey, what was the best job you ever had? And who was the best boss you ever had? And paint that picture for yourself, because within that realization, and people can usually, they very, very quickly embrace that concept, and they immediately say, oh yeah, it was 10 years ago, I had a fantastic run at this company. Whatever that looks like, whatever was generally great about that, or whatever you were doing at that point where you were the happiest, is some form of what you should be trying to create for yourself now. So rather than point the 50-year-old at some aspect of real estate that I might be interested in, have that person, thinking about replicating one of the happiest times in their careers and the happiest activity, whatever it was that they were doing, and find your way back to that. Not literally back to that, because you probably can't go home, but whatever you want to do next better look a lot like that.
No, that makes sense. That's great feedback and great advice, Paul. Now let's talk about the other aspect of the spectrum that we have. And another attendee is currently in high school, which is a little bit earlier than college. And of course, they are asking if the B6 has any opportunities for someone of that age. But I think in any transition, whether it's high school to college or whatever it might be, I think that there's different ways to prepare for that transition. When I was, and I'm just going to use myself as an example, when you're transitioning from high school to college, it's like, what kind of coursework can you take? I'm not sure if you would present finance. Obviously, if there's real estate courses that might be there, but what direction or what foundational skills do you think that you've learned in college that have helped you towards your real estate career, if that makes sense?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, I admire the high schooler who's even thinking about this at this point. It's rare and it's healthy, and that's good. I think investment analysis courses, understanding the fundamentals of valuation, whether it be real estate or companies, are great. I think a lot of people end up in bank training programs where they're underwriting the credit and the whole businesses, and whether they stay in banking or not, they come away with an ability to understand a balance sheet, understand a P&L. I think just those fundamentals of accounting are a great foundational type things. But really, even a lot of college students, juniors and seniors, come to us and say, what can I do to prepare? There's not much you can do. You really, and I say to them, what do you think your biggest asset is when you're talking to potential employers? And they pause and scratch their head. And I said, you're going to be able to work your butt off. That's your biggest asset, and that's what you should sell, because you're not bringing a breadth of experience, no matter who you are, to your company or to your business. But the one thing that you can do for yourself is convince people that you are someone who just puts your all into it. And when you describe that to someone who you want to work with, a great thing are concrete examples. Like, I was a D1 athlete where I knew you just didn't show up on Saturday and win the game without grinding it out for months and months and months, practicing before the season started. That's someone who I know understands working their butt off, or someone who excels at anything, whether they're the captain of the debate team, or they're the lead in the school play, or they're president of their class, or whatever. People who excel, and this is different than leadership, have very concrete forms of showing it, and it goes back to even kindergarten. You'll see people have been high performers for their whole lives, and so it's very concrete. It's very much there in their bio if you really look for it. So be thinking about that when you're presenting yourself. Just saying I'll work my butt off, it is much less attractive than if you say I've done this, I've done that. I know, make it concrete for people so they can really picture, who you are and what your capabilities are.
No, I think that's fantastic, and I know it's something we didn't discuss during our conversation, but I too am a former NCAA Division I athlete, and I always find it so interesting how many of my friends or folks that I played against I run into that were former Division I athletes across the board.
What sport was it?
I played baseball.
What position?
Outfield.
So you can hit.
Yeah, a little bit. I can hit and run.
That's great.
Yeah, for sure. So with that being said, I agree. I think you see it across the board. Is like there's an experience there that is a benefit, and I think just finding that experience and also to that point, finding if you're looking for an employer, finding some level of affiliation with that person is always helpful in adding value to your search or what you're trying to do in your pursuit of your career. It's about 12:45 now, and we're getting close to winding down. So I have one more question. It's actually from DJ Johnston from your team, who you had mentioned before. First, he noticed that you have a finger injury and wanted you to discuss what that was about, and then obviously dive into a little bit more about how that happened, and obviously some of your personal passions on what you like to do outside of real estate when you're not in the office.
I've got a million hobbies, and most of them are really beneficial because been in the martial arts most of my life. This is my new passion is pursuing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I pay 26-year-olds not to hurt me, but one made a mistake and I jammed my finger last week, but it's a flesh wound. It's no big deal. But the great thing about finding a hobby like a sport like that, or I boxed for a while, is I can't be the Equinox, no offense, gym guy, because where is that going, right? If you're into a sport, you're building a skill every year, you're getting better at it every year, and then you don't even realize what kind of a great workout you're getting, because it's a game and you're playing the game, and then you walk out and you're fresh. And usually I shoot for middle of the day, which is tough sometimes, but no matter what kind of morning I've had, if I get a great workout in, shower up, back to work, you feel like you're, completely energized. So I'd advocate some form of exercise and some form of it being a game. It's just something that stayed with me my whole life. Yeah, and we also we have a culture here at B6 of work hard, play hard. We think that that's critical, especially if you've got a family, you want to dedicate the appropriate amount of time to the family, but take a lot of time off. We have a no vacation policy, which means that you don't have to ask anyone to go on vacation. You can take as much vacation time as you want. But we had a young person who came into the office the other day, and he's like, I heard you have a no vacation policy. You don't let people have vacation? And I said, no, it's the opposite. But if you think about it, A players, people who get things done, I frequently find don't take enough time off. And if someone's kind of in a funk or having a bad time, frequently I will say to them, when was the last time you took a vacation? And they'll say, oh, it's been so long. It's been almost a year. I kept meaning to. And I'll say to them, look, I'm going to come back to you in a week. And I would love it if you had planned a vacation, because I think that'll really benefit you. And it almost always goes the same way. I'll come back in another week and say, well, have you planned your vacation? And they'll say, no, I didn't get to it. And then I say, I'm going to come back in another week, and you really ought to have one plan. And then the second time I show up, they have a big smile on their face because they have planned the vacation and they're anticipating it, which is half the fun anyway. So I think embrace your hobbies, have a million hobbies, have a million interests. The profile of our most successful salespeople, and this includes DJ, who's like a crazy good skier and spends a ton of time with his kids. He's a poster child for what we're talking about right now. So so be at a company that embraces that kind of culture.
No, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. And I have one more question, which kind of ties into something we discussed before, as far as passion goes, but I wanted to mention it. Someone trying to determine to pursue investment sales or debt brokerage. I know there's some similarities to those two different aspects of the job. But where do you find, I guess, if you've seen in your experience, where do you find the personality traits that vary between those two types of folks? Because I found that some of those I would say both of those are somewhat of called hunting type jobs. What do you see the difference in the difference between those two different hunts per se?
The similarity of those two different types of salesmen are that they're probably someone who embraces discipline in a very, very highly functioning way. I mean, you're really managing a pipeline, and what you put into the pipeline and what comes out are different from those two different disciplines. But the similarity of that personality type is that again, it gets back to, if you're an athlete, you know what you need to put in your pipeline to practice and be ready. I would say that a debt broker is probably, and I mean this in a complimentary, as a complimentary word, is a more of a quant type personality, where they're really into calculating the benefit to the client over a period of years, what the interest rate will be, what the swaps might be, what the other details of a loan might be. That typically is stuff that doesn't interest the investment sales broker as much. The investment sales broker is about the value of the property, how you're underwriting the property, how to execute the sale of the property. That's more focused on like that.
No, very interesting. I think that's a great way of explaining it. Yeah, I think that's a great way of explaining it. I think, just in my experience is like, when you are, you might see, and let me know if you think I'm wrong, you might see more debt transactions historically, because people have to get debt when they acquire property or when they refinance or recapitalization when they're just selling, when someone's just selling a building. It may not be as frequent as debt is needed.
Well,
have you seen that?
That's absolutely, you're dead on with that. A real stat is that the average building in New York City sells once every 39 years.
Wow.
That's
Wow.
because that's an amazing stat, and that's a real number. That's because the tax structure is completely against selling. If you sell a property where you've got a low basis, you bought it a long time ago, and you've depreciated it out, and so you're basically selling a property, and it's all capital gains. So you've got federal, state, and local capital gains. You've got city transfer tax, state transfer tax, broker fee, legal fee. You walk away with 63 cents. You sell a $10 million building, you walk away with $6.3 million. Wow. And so therefore, no one sells because, especially historically, New York City properties have done so well. It's economically irrational for you to sell. So who sells? 3,000 people in New York on average sell every year. And those are people who have, they're passed away, their estate needs to be settled. Okay, thanks for warning me about the taxes. I'm exhausted. I've run this building forever. I just want to go off and retire. Or I've got an old partnership that needs to wind down, or a family situation that needs to wind down. None of those are really economically rational considerations. They're personal. So our typical client is transacting for personal reasons. So out of 200,000 buildings, you only have 3,000 buildings that sell in a normal year. But people refi every 4 and 5. So if you look at on the sales size, 3,000 transactions, roughly $45 billion of consideration in the 5 boroughs every year. On the debt side, it's massive. It's 9,000 debt transactions annually, and $130 billion of consideration. So the debt business is the big dollar volume business, and the transactions are more frequent. So yeah, that's why those businesses are very complementary, but very different in the same way.
Very, very, very well. That makes a lot of sense, and thank you for your clear explanation on that. Well, we are getting down to the end. Anybody who would like to submit any other questions, please do so now. Paul, I guess my last question to you, if no one else is going to submit, is there anything that you have to say to the group as a whole about today's conversation, and anything that we didn't touch on that might be relevant to the group as a whole?
Yeah, just whether you're really interested in working directly in our end of the real estate spectrum or our niche, we're always willing to talk to folks about their career or what's going on with them. It's kind of a passion of ours. So if you ever want to just talk, just pick up the phone and call. And whether it's career advice or looking for some mentorship or whatever, it's a big part of what we love about the business. So we're always here to help you or guide you. And Natasha, who runs our recruiting too, is fantastic. If we don't have a spot for somebody, she's very diligent about trying to help them in any way she can with connecting them with other companies. So lean on us. We're here, and we love to do that. So
awesome. So thank you, Paul, and thank you so much for your time today. I had a great time chatting with you before this. I had a great time chatting with you now, and I wanted to thank you as well as everybody else, obviously, who listened today. For all of those out there, obviously you can contact Paul at B6. If you're looking for other content that Cure has, please stop by our website at Cure New York NY. Sorry, it's cureny.com to find out any information on future Cure events. Everybody have a great week, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Darren.
Of course.